What is going on, everybody, and welcome to this episode of From Mourning to Action, Powerfully Working Through Loss. I am your host, Dr. Damon Silas, and this is the podcast where I have the honor and pleasure of speaking to people about their losses and how they have powerfully and continue to work through their losses as broadly as we define those losses here on this show. As those of you know, we tend to have a range of guests who talk about various losses, and honestly, I'm really excited about our guest today because I think he embodies, as we release this on Valentine's Day, he embodies all that love is about, and you'll find out why. So let me first introduce him. Tommy Allgood, a.k.a. Thomas Garvin, is a registered nurse based in Charlotte, North Carolina. And he's also the owner and founder of Tommy Allgood Coaching and Consulting. So Tommy Allgood, do me a favor and say hello to the people out there.
Hey everybody, how's it going?
Well, look, I am so thrilled to have you on today's episode. Like I said, let's do this. Let's get into, your loss and, what you would like to share with the people in terms of what you've been through. And we'll take it from there. So go ahead. I'm going to leave that floor open to you.
Yeah, so when we talk about loss, I think oftentimes we talk about physical losses or we talk about relationship losses. And we don't really talk about what it is like to lose a spiritual community. And so often as people go throughout life and morph and form, some of the things that they're handed as children, as they have their own experiences in life, they begin to experience shifts and changes. And if those shifts and changes don't mesh in well in certain areas or in certain communities, then oftentimes you can be not welcomed into those communities, despite many spiritual communities saying that we are welcoming, and that we welcome all. It's easy to talk the talk, but then there comes some difficulty when it comes to walking the walk. So my loss is surrounding that spiritual. Losing that spiritual community.
Got it. So, you grew up in a spiritual community, and what you're saying is at some point you separated from the lessons that you learned and you took from that spiritual community. So can you share a little bit about what that process has been for you?
Yeah. So I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, and what I want to take a moment here and pause and say that what I hope people take away from this conversation is not that any particular religious denomination is bad or think that my religious upbringing was somehow unloving or cruel, because it wasn't. I grew up in a very healthy and nurturing environment. But I do think that this will identify across the spectrum, especially in more conservative evangelical circles of thought that are more legalistic or fundamentalist when it comes to certain theologies that they might have that tends to exclude people rather than include them. So from my experience growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, they sort of a fundamentalist religion, and so it was a beautiful, beautiful environment, and I began to wake up at a very early age to my sexuality, and understand that what I was waking up to internally was not congruent or conducive to what I was learning externally through my spiritual community. And it became painfully clear from an early age that who I was not going to be welcomed and accepted fully unless I suppressed important parts of myself. Yeah.
Got it. Now, and you talk about, we see this a lot and we hear about this a lot. Did you get direct messages, or was it just, that through subtle or not so subtle messages, they said, whether it's if you're gay or, whatever it may be, that we can't accept you into our spiritual community as you are?
Mm-hmm. So Jehovah's Witnesses in particular are very. I would almost equate them to Puritans. If you know anything about the Puritans, as they broke away from the Church of England and came over, they were really concerned with like this religious purity.
Mm-hmm.
And so Jehovah's Witnesses tend to be to focus on a more literal interpretation of Scripture where possible, and understanding a lot of the prophetic words and visions in the Scriptures through whatever channels that they have. And so what that looks like for me, as I've kind of examined other spiritual circles, is this conversation between affirming and non-affirming and being a welcoming space. There are many, many churches that advertise themselves as welcoming but non-affirming. And what that traditionally means is that you can have these feelings and be in this space with us, but if you begin to act on this space, then we have to take a stand, and that is not welcome here. You can't be in a leadership position. You can't have a voice because in some way you're tainted, or you are devoid and lacking of spirit, and that will make the environment or the congregation or the church somehow unclean.
And people uncomfortable.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. But and honestly, that discomfort comes from sort of a nurturing a person to be uncomfortable with that and not challenge those notions. But yeah, I'm pretty sure we'll dive more into that as we go. But I want to. It is not the same to be affirming. It is to say to a person, all of your being is welcome here in this space, and we value you in this space. To be welcoming is to be tolerant of a person. And we're in February, and it's Black History Month. Separate but equal was a way of tolerating the Black community. We have to move beyond tolerance and learn how do we be in community with one another.
Yes, and thank you for making that distinction, because being affirming is you are complete and whole and lovable just as you are, versus welcoming, like you said. I mean, you're welcome, but you gotta leave parts of yourself outside of the door. We can't. And I've heard a lot of people struggle with that. Like, how can I be a part of an organization that doesn't love me, or even a family or community that actually says a part of me is not okay? So I'm just curious, like, how you in your process affirmed yourself. What kinds of things would you say to yourself to say, you know what, I am complete, I am whole as is? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so in some of our work together, we have a lot of these discussions on how we think and what we put into our minds. And to be honest, at the beginning, so when I got excommunicated from my community, what they call it disfellowshipping, as a way to protect the congregation against certain viewpoints and actions.
And so do they, I'm sorry, just so clarification, do they tell you, this is the reason why you're excommunicated, or do they just kind of subtly push you out?
Oh, so they have, for Jehovah's Witnesses specifically, they have kind of almost, there are sins per se, and then there are serious sins or gross sins, as they would call it. And it's not just, when I say that they are more along the lines of trying to be puritanical, or as close to the early first century Christian congregation as possible as they could. they could attain to. It doesn't matter if you are having sex outside of marriage, if you get divorced for an unscriptural reason, if you make habits out of lying, gambling, homosexuality. All of these things make you eligible to get kicked out of the congregation as a Jehovah's Witness. And so what they do is kind of like Catholics have confessional. So they utilize scriptures that talk about confessing to the older men, and they create what they call a judicial process in an effort to help a person recover from their sin or their sickness, as they would call it. And what it really ends up being is just a interaction where you recount all the details of whatever it is that you did and essentially get judged and deemed worthy to stay in the congregation or get cast out of the congregation, depending on how you respond and your demeanor in those meetings.
Wow. So you had a lot of emotional stuff to work through. I'm imagining as you went through this process of, the church is telling me I'm not good enough, and there's something inherently wrong with me, that I'm sinful by nature of who I am. So I'm sorry. So to get back on, what would you say then after all these years? How do you start to say something more affirming to yourself? What is that?
So first, I would say afterwards there was just this loss, this immense loss, this loss of community, this loss of direction. Because I think we tend to take our spiritual formations and or our spiritual influences and inform the direction and pathways of our life in a lot of different ways, how we treat people and how we interact with people. And all of a sudden I'm sitting here by myself with everything that I had known for 20 years, kind of the rug pulled from under my feet and me laying on my face. And I was in this really, really dark space. And as I look back on it now, what I truly believe is that source was in that dark space. The divine was in that dark space with me. And when it got too much for me to bear, he opened my eyes to the community that was all around me. He began to create these shifts, or he or she, whatever essence you want to refer to, God or the divine or source or whatever your faith tradition is. It began to open my eyes to the community that was around me gradually by the people that I began to meet and interact with. And the messages that these people brought to me, who I'm still friends with to this day, I think specifically when it comes to the notion of dealing with homosexuality in the church, you're giving a message of you can't be a homosexual because these people are perverts, these people are bad, they are depraved, they are without moral compass, and these are the toxic messages that you receive, and so you distance yourself from that community. And so all of a sudden, these people who were supposedly living this depraved, immoral life started popping up into my life. And apparently the depravity of it all was enjoying a drink with your friends and having dinner and breaking bread with somebody. And so that began to unlock this journey of questioning for me of, are the things that I was taught really worth holding on to? Or are they holding me back and putting me in a space where I judge